Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is A&N Profiles. Today I'm here with Elias Brasil de Souza, and he is the director of the Biblical Research Institute. Did I get all that right?
Yes, perfectly right.
Did I get your name right?
Yes.
It's Elias. Okay. I actually had my team help me beforehand. Elias, you are the director of the Biblical Research Institute. Before we get into your life story a little bit, there might be people who are watching this who don't even know what the Biblical Research Institute is. Would you give us just a short little synopsis of what is the work of the Biblical Research Institute?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. The BRI is one of the institutes or departments, I wouldn't say department, but a service of the church. We are 5 scholars, 3 assistants, and we basically do research to help to promote the church's message, its lifestyle, and its mission. So we do publications, we travel doing Bible conferences and lecturing around the world. All of this is with the intention to make clear the identity of the church and the commitment that we have to Scripture. That's why it's called Biblical Research Institute.
So, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You also tried to tackle the questions that a lot of people are asking. So it's not just like what our current fundamental beliefs are. You tried to take subjects, issues that maybe come along with today's time and place and be able to give a biblical perspective that is well thought out theologically for that. Would that be accurate as well?
Precisely. We also publish books and other materials that addresses these issues. Now, we have several publications. We have a website. We also answer questions that most of them are in the website. And we also serve the leadership of the church worldwide. When there is a theological issue, something related to fundamental belief, and even to church manual, when it has to do with theology, usually we are involved.
So I would guess then, in order to be able to serve as one of these 5 directors or associates, you have to be a theologian. You're not just a pastor, you're like a theologian. Would that be correct?
Yes, it's correct. We call people who have gone through a process of education and they finally reached their doctorates in those fields so that they can be more helpful, because we do not only serve the church, the membership of the church in general, but one of our basic, targets is our colleagues, theologians, professors of theology worldwide. So we have projects and programs to reach them and also to involve them in research that we are doing. So we do not work alone. It's important to emphasize that. But we have a pool of scholars that we put together to help us with our projects.
So I'm working my master's, as you know, because I come up and visit you sometimes. And I think I've had the privilege, we're going to call it the privilege, of reading 3 different BRI books. And you're right, they're written for scholars, biblical scholars, because sometimes I have to reread paragraphs 2 or 3 times. By the time I'm about halfway through a book, I find that I can finally start to get through it. But you write for a very, for our pastors, for our church leaders, to help them truly be able to understand. We get into the Hebrew and the Greek and all that. It's beautiful.
We have a few more popular, more general audience publications, but our basic intention is to dig deeper into Scripture, find the foundations of what we believe, or the doctrines that we hold so dear, answer the questions, but do so in such a way that can be useful to scholars. And we hope that these scholars and pastors and leaders, they can take these materials and simplify to convey them in a language that is more accessible to the church, to church members in general.
So now we understand a little bit about what you do and what the department is. Let's talk about you. You're the director of BRI, but you were not born that. So where were you born? And tell us a little bit about your mom and dad.
I was born in a small town in the southernmost part of Brazil. It's a city called Tapes, which is an indigenous name. A very small town. And I was happy to be born in an Adventist family. So I was raised as Seventh-day Adventist since I was born. My father, who is still alive, he's 93 years old now. He has been a leader in various capacities in the church, church elder, very active in giving Bible studies. So I was, let's say, raised in that environment. And I still remember my father always reading the Spirit of Prophecy books, reading the Bible. And another thing that always was very important to me is that my father was always very faithful in everything, but especially in tithes. So it was something that was really impressive because he would count every cent. He would be very faithful in that regard.
So you would actually see him counting his money to put in the envelope. That's interesting because I think you're the first person I've interviewed who's actually mentioned their parents' faithfulness and tithe. And, I think about it now, my kids wouldn't even see it because, we kind of do everything electronically these days and whatever. But so you would see him each week set aside that portion.
And also very faithful in the business because he was a beekeeper. He also worked in agricultural activities and he did a lot of things to survive because I come from a very poor background. But in all his business, he acted with a lot of integrity. So he had a lot of friends and acquaintances in the town, the small town. But everyone would admire him for his integrity, his faithfulness in his business and to the church. And to Jesus, of course, above all.
Do you remember having family worships
yes,
as a kid?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
It was not sophisticated, of course. We'd just sit around the table. We would study the quarterly, the lesson, the Sabbath school quarterly. Would read the Bible. My father also would like to read something from the Spirit of Prophecy. So this was basically our routine.
So when you were, as you're growing up here, did you have siblings or are you an only child?
Yes, I have two sisters and one brother.
And are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest.
Okay. Yeah, actually makes so much sense.
I have a double blessing. So
you have a double blessing. All right. So you're the oldest of four. And were you able to attend Adventist schools in your elementary years?
No, unfortunately, up to the high school, I had to depend on the public system of education. My first Adventist school was the seminary, the theological seminary, when I came to study theology, to become a pastor. But before that, I worked as a literature evangelist for some time.
Okay. Well, let's just talk about your elementary years. So you sound like you come from a family that is very firm in their Adventist beliefs. Were there any tensions going to a public school and being an Adventist that you experienced in those elementary years?
Yes, there was. At that time, it was not fashionable to speak about freedom, about pluralism, about religious liberty. So it was normal that you would be even harassed by teachers, that would make fun of you because you wouldn't wouldn't attend the classes on the Sabbath. So I have a lot of challenges. Those were very difficult years for Seventh-day Adventist students outside the Adventist system. But the Lord gave me the strength so that I could survive, and eventually I finished my studies at the level of we called high school. That in Brazil it is the prerequisite to go to the seminary, which is, we would say, undergrad here in the United States, but that's just a bachelor's in theology.
Yeah. So when you were in elementary, did you have any hobbies that you enjoyed doing? Were you into sports? Were you what was little Elias like?
Well, not very much of a sport. I'm not a sports person.
Me neither.
What I usually do is physically is to walk. I like to walk, and sometimes I walk on a treadmill because this is my obligation, but otherwise I'm not very much into it. I always like to read, and I used to read a lot. That's basically, I would say, my main hobby. But there was another thing that I used to do, not only as a hobby, but even to get to earn some money when I was very young, from probably 15 up to 23 years old, which was I worked in electronics for some time. So I used to work in a shop And my task was to fix radios, install sound systems in cars, these kinds of things.
So my daughter has a broken CD player. So what you're telling me is I could bring it to you and you can fix her CD player?
Well, if it's dated to that time
It
of the
probably
technology,
is.
I
It's
might
very,
be able
very
to
old.
help. Yeah.
She wanted a really old-fashioned CD player, and then it broke, and I'm like, I don't know where to get it fixed.
When I started working with these, I was 15 years old. It was the time of those tubes in radios, those valves.
Yeah, no, this would be after
Then
tubes.
came the transistors, and now you have different kind of systems, integrated systems, which are much more sophisticated. But I'm from an older time, so
Okay.
there is still wires and things to put together. This is what I used to do.
All right, so you did electronics. That's interesting. It's always fun kind of finding like these little things that you wouldn't necessarily know about people. Now, are you musical at all?
Well, I used to sing in a quartet when I was
In a quartet? What part?
With some. Well, I would do the second tenor,
Okay.
but I was never kind of a good singer. I did because I liked it at the time, and I would sing with my cousins, my friends, some of my relatives. So we had a few, let's say, compositions of quartets, and I used to like it very much. I still like it, but not to sing myself. Just
You'll let someone
to
else
enjoy.
sing.
But there's something about my work that I sometimes I think about it, and probably I should mention this here. That I work in a shop, and the owner, of course, was not Seventh-day Adventist, so I had the opportunity to be a witness there. But it was a very challenging work because I have to deal with customers, people coming. Is my radio, is my TV ready? And sometimes it was not ready. And then they were angry. So I was in charge of having to be the face of the shop to the customers because the owner usually would not be there. So I think in a way that prepared me to face challenges in dealing with people that I had to face later on when I had my churches to pastor. You know.
That's interesting. God was already trying to teach you
Yeah.
how to deal with personalities and conflicts and challenges.
Some were very difficult because people get there very angry, and they will scream and they will shout, and I have to deal with that kind of thing. So it was very difficult.
So when were you baptized? How old were you?
I don't remember exactly. I think I was 11 years old.
Okay.
It was in the lagoon that we have there in my town. Very, very beautiful place. I remember the day that I was baptized as if it were today. Everything
Really?
is clear in my mind. I still have my baptismal certificate at home. I don't recall exactly. I think it was December 11 or something like that, around that
In my
date.
mind, I was
Of
just like that.
71. Now I can remember. 71.
71.
Yeah,
So in my mind, I just thought, oh, that would have been so cold in December. And then I remembered, but you were in southern Brazil. So it was
yeah.
not really
No. The best time of the year for a baptism.
Yeah, that'd be like June in northern
Yeah.
hemisphere. So although you were baptized at around 11, would you say that's when you really came to know Jesus? Or did you ever have an experience where it's like this was the moment that you just knew that he was
Yeah, I think the baptism was a watermark in the whole process. It really was a transitional moment for me. Although this was not so abrupt, there was not so much discontinuity between what I was before and that was after that. I think because I was born in the church, so I was going to the Sabbath school, children's schools since my very tender age. So to me, everything was very natural. It's part of almost of my culture, which sometimes is a danger because it becomes so normal to you that you don't feel the power of the gospel, the power of the Spirit. And this is something that everyone who was born in the church needs to ask that question once in a while. Am I a born-again Christian? Do I have an experience with Christ? Or I'm just following a tradition that I have received. So this is a challenge that probably I had. Not much conscience at that time, but today, looking back, I feel that situation. I I think that we as young people, we have to ask that question and try to develop a relationship with Jesus that is personal and not just go with the tradition of the family.
So,
Although I'm very grateful for that tradition. I think
because it
I'm
gives
very
us a great
grateful.
foundation.
Yeah, because of that tradition, I never smoked, I never drank. And I see these two things alone makes a lot of difference in anybody's life, anybody's health,
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that.
So, well, we have these great foundations because I also had that same foundation. You still have to build your own house. Okay. So I have a question. Did you ever struggle with your faith? Like in those teen years or whatever? Like, or did you just always know, nope, I'm committed. There was never any question. Did you ever go through a point of just struggle before it became your own and not your family's?
Well, I think I struggled because one of the reasons, 2 points probably I should mention. One is a more intellectual and the other one is more experiential. At a very young age, I started to read books on theology and these kinds of things. I would go to the Catholic bookshop. That was the only one available, and I would purchase books there that would explain the Bible. I knew they are not exactly what I believe, but later on I learned that was historical critical methodology that was being applied to the Bible.
Real quickly, because there's people who do not know what that word is that you just said. What is historical critical methodology?
A historical critical methodology means that you discount the inspiration and the authority of Scripture, and we interpret it rationally. You basically do not consider miracles and the direct intervention of God in history. So I remember that once I read a book about Jonah, the book of Jonah. And the author was just saying, well, this is just a legend. This is just a story that was made up. This is just a parable. So that was shocking to me because I have learned the story of Jonah from my parents, from the children's school, and that's not how I believe. But I said, this is shocking to me. At least it was shocking at that moment. But so that was something that was in my mind. But when I went to the seminary later on, and I started to understand the interpretation of the Bible, the hermeneutics, the different schools of interpretation, and the different frameworks. And then I learned that when we study the Bible on its own terms, not on the basis of a framework that comes from outside the Bible. See, so that was a kind of intellectual situation that's what was with me for some time. The other one is more experiential. So the issue of I don't think I understood quite well justification by faith as much as my parents who speak about forgiveness, about salvation, about these things. But I think I at the bottom of my heart, I did not understand it quite well. But I remember that when at the seminary, so I had a class on soteriology, which is the doctrine of salvation.
Thank you for interpreting that.
And that really opened my mind. So I think that was a crucial moment for me to understand what it is to be a Christian, what it means to be in Christ, to be saved by Christ, to be justified by faith. Because up to that point, I don't think I understood it quite well.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Because now, and I mean, we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but we're getting perspectives based off of that. You go around now and try to help people to understand theology and stuff. I think this is still a very fundamental problem. Most people do not really understand righteousness by faith. I would say, well, I would have told you for years that I believed it. It was a year and a half ago. I was actually reading the Sanctuary book from BRI, actually, and I was taking a class with Richard Davison. And it was the first time in my life I really, truly understood it. How do we help people to really understand it? You were in seminary. I was 43 years old when I I could have told you I believed it, but I realized I didn't actually. How do we help people have this knowledge sooner?
I think we have the materials for that. We have what we need to know. And I would say the best book that teaches about justification by faith with clarity, with simplicity, is Steps to Christ by Ellen White. That book helped me a lot as well, So I think every Seventh-day Adventist who really reads, or every person who really reads the steps to Christ carefully and meditates on it, and then really reads it, will understand what his justification by faith is. So it's a wonderful book. It gives the assurance of salvation, because everything comes down to this point when it comes to experience. I'm sure I'm saved. I have that assurance. If, let's say, I would die today, I would be saved when Jesus comes again. So this is the point, and I think Steps to Christ explains this very well. And some people, they fear justification by faith, even to preach or to speak about that, because they have a dichotomy. Justification is one thing, obedience is another thing. But these two aspects of the experience, the Christian experience, they go together.
Yeah.
The more saved you are, I think, the more secure you are that you are saved, the more commitment you will have to respond to that salvation in obedience, in faithfulness. So this is my understanding.
Okay. So you said that out of high school you go to the seminary, and you were explaining that seminary, the way we view seminary in America is different than...
It's a bit different, yes.
Yes. So seminary down there is like your undergrad. So you decide to go to seminary / undergrad in theology. Did you always know you wanted to be a pastor?
Yes, at very young age, when I was still in my local church, I used to be very close to the pastors who passed through that church. I always was there helping them. A couple of them were very close to me, to my family. They would go to visit us. I think that's why pastoral visitation for me it's crucial. So I was very close to the pastor. I would admire the work that they did. And at a very tender age, I was already a member of the church board. So I was...
How old were you?
Probably 15, 16, something like that.
You were on the church board.
I would say 16. I don't recall exactly, but it was a very tender age. And I was there helping. I was secretary of the church. I was in the committees. So I was following some challenges that they were facing. That is normal in any group of people, in any community, any congregation. So somehow I felt attracted to ministry, and I also liked the doctrinal aspects. That's I think what attracted me to the church most of all was the message of the church, what the church has to say to the world. I think
Which is what?
This is what makes the difference. The hope of the second coming of Christ, the sanctuary, the gift of prophecy. So these kinds of things that we hold so dear. For me, that made all the difference. So it made us different from any other religious movement, because I could go to any other church, if it were not for those distinctives.
So I find it interesting because the second one that you just said was the doctrine of the sanctuary. Again, I took the class with Richard Davidson, read the book. It's also something that we do not understand. We all talk about, the investigative judgment. I believe in the doctrine of sanctuary, but I don't think we understand that one either. Because when we understand it, it's freeing and it's beautiful. I remember the professor actually almost in tears as he's sharing it. And so I love the fact that as a young person, you found that appreciation for these doctrines, because so many of us just go through and say we accept these fundamental beliefs, but I don't think that we understand the transformational nature that really comes from understanding the beliefs.
Yeah, this lies at the core of what we are, of what we believe. And of course, everything begins in terms of biblical framework in the Old Testament, when God gave Israel the sanctuary. But God did not only give the sanctuary, He gave His presence to the people. And this is what people sometimes do not understand. When you believe in the sanctuary, when you understand what is being taught through this doctrine, actually, it's God's presence with us through Jesus Christ.
It's really
and
beautiful.
Everything that is happening has to do with that presence. Today in the heavenly sanctuary, in the what we call investigative judgment or pre-advent judgment, that's a special work that Christ is doing for us.
Yeah. So you go to seminary and you pursue your degree and you graduate and you become a pastor. Were there any challenges that you went through during that time?
Well, the challenges, I would say, were more probably on the financial side, because you have to pay from your own pocket. I had the blessing when I went to the seminary. I had a very dear church member of my church that once I finished this, I was dreaming about going to the seminary for a few years. But once I finished a sermon that I had preached in my local church, and one of the elders, that was a person with means, he came to me and said, if you want to go to the seminary, I will pay for you to study.
Oh, wow.
So that gave me that encouragement that I needed. So then I went to the seminary, but I didn't want to depend on him for everything. So I would go to do my literature evangelism every time that I had to.
How many years? Or?
I would say seven vacation times.
I did seven.
Summers
because
of the last one doesn't count. I had graduated already. But before that, prior to that, I had been a literature evangelist full-time for
Really?
2.5 years. So I had the privilege of working certain campaigns with colleagues. We would go to certain towns and live there for a couple of months and work door by door. So I had done that before. So when I went to the seminary, I had already that experience, which was very helpful. But it was very a stressful moment when the semester ends and then you have to go out to find a means to come back. Of course, I could count on that help, but I didn't want to depend on everything, so I needed to find my own way through the system. And to cut a long story short, the Lord blessed me that eventually I was able to graduate. And for that, of course, I don't ascribe to my own power, my own merits, or I had certain periods which I did great and I got a good resource, a lot of money. Other times I didn't get almost anything. If it wasn't for that kind of help that I had, I would not have made through the seminary. So looking back, I think, like everybody else, I am a product of the goodness and mercy and grace of a lot of people who were behind. I would never be here without those people, which this brother that helped me a lot, and also, of course, the whole education, the whole process in the seminary.
Do you remember what your favorite class was?
Well, I liked Hebrew very much. I did just
Hebrew.
once. Yes, I did one semester of Hebrew, and I was able to do it in the first semester of my seminary studies. Usually Hebrew would be in the second semester. But because I had English already, so they allowed me to take Hebrew, to start with Hebrew. So I was in the first year of my studies. By then I went with I meant to say Hebrew was offered in the second year, in the second semester.
Got it.
But I was able to do it the first year in the second semester. So I had in that particular slot, I would go with the second year students and have Hebrew with them. So
which college were you at?
I
seminary?
started in the northeast of Brazil. It's a pioneering school. It's called, in Portuguese, Educandário Nordestino Adventista. School Adventist School of Northeast or something like that. I don't know exactly the English term for that. But that school eventually, for the first year I was there. When the second year came, it was a moment of transition because they moved the seminary, the School of Theology, from that institution, which is in the northeast, in the state of Pernambuco, down to Bahia, which is another state, to another school that was new. And then I finished there, 3 years more there.
Okay.
Where I later on returned to be a teacher and to work at the seminary.
So you go and you become a pastor first year out of school. Tell me a little bit about going out and actually being a pastor, because you can learn all sorts of things, but going and being a pastor is very different than being educated.
Before going there, let me just add a piece of information here to make the story full and complete.
Absolutely.
At the seminary, I met the lady that became my wife later on. See,
Yeah, that's
so
true. I should have
yeah.
asked by this point.
So we are studying together from the first to the fourth year of theology. We studied together the whole time, but we started to date in the first year, in the second semester. We got married when we were in the third year. So by the fourth year, the last year, we were already married. So that's a very important part of my story. That,
What is her name?
Magela in
Magela.
Portuguese, Magela, yeah.
Magela.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's part of the story, so that we can follow.
So she was doing theology with you?
Theology as well, yes.
Excellent. Okay. Did she have a special? Because you have a specific area that now, or did you define that later when you're working more towards your doctorate?
Usually, well, formally, academically, you define it much later.
Okay.
But since my seminary years, I was already very much interested in Old Testament, probably because of Hebrew. So once I did the first semester of Hebrew, I
that
was
was it.
so enchanted by the language, by the things that I saw there. So I started to study on my own. I had already studied English, German, and French by my own, with those programs that they would offer in the newsstands at the time. There you receive a kind of magazine with a cassette. Probably you still remember those tapes that would come every week. They would send one of those magazines with a tape, and this is how I learned English. So
Did you also learn the other languages?
And of course, I studied German and French, which was enough to help in my doctoral program later on, because I had to do an exam in these languages, but I never practiced them. So eventually you lose any kind of fluency. But I used to communicate a little bit in those languages as well, especially French, which is very close to Portuguese.
Well, you're doing pretty good in English right now.
Today, well, thank you. You are very kind, and I like to hear that. It helps my self-esteem. So,
Well, I'm here for it. If you ever need to come down to my office and talk, I'm like, your English is great today.
But so this was my learning process in those years, because of course, as I explained, we did not have the means to go to an English school or to invest so much, in a formal way of learning. So I had to use these ways, to.
So your wife and you go to your first pastorate. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we had a wonderful experience in the south of Brazil when we had the first church that we were assigned. Actually, it was not a church; it was a pastoral district. And
How many churches?
I had 11 congregations.
11.
Yes, I have a few organized churches that we call, and a few companies. Probably, I would say...
Sounds more like than a few. A few is 3. If you had 11, it wasn't a few of each.
I would have probably, I would say, from one church, from the two extremes of the territory I was supposed to serve, probably 200, 250 kilometers, more or less, from one end to the other.
And I'm trying really hard to translate this into
in
miles.
miles, probably, I would say 150 miles, something like that.
That's like,
a
bit
like
of
that.
a territory.
Yeah, it was a big of a territory. So I would visit those churches. At the time, it was the first 2 years, I didn't have a car. So I had to go by bus, by boat, because I have some churches that were out across not a bay, but a piece, a body of water that separated the main city to a small city, but there was a boat that I had to take. So to visit some churches that I have at the other side. I used bus a lot, and I walked a lot, because I had to visit my church members. And I always loved visiting them, because I could not feel myself a pastor if I would not visit my church members.
Do you feel like it's a lost art? Visitation.
Oh, yeah. I think I cannot conceive of a pastor who does not visit his members or her members or does visitation. I think this is crucial, because it's there that the people open their hearts to you. It's there that you can help them, pray for them. When you come to the church to pray, to preach, it's more collective. There's a distance, But when you go to their homes and and pray with them and listen to them, then you understand actually the full extent of what you have to do, of the responsibility that you have. Because when you were preaching in the church and you look at them, you know what situations they're facing and how much encouragement they need to face the trials of life. See?
Pastoring 11 churches slash companies.
This was my first one. The
Yes.
second one I had 9.
Oh, well, look at that. They took two off.
Yeah, but I have 4 schools, 5 if I count another one. So so I had a lot.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. That's a lot for a pastor.
It's not like that today. I must say that the church has grown a lot. So in some cases, in some of these districts that had all these churches, today they have 2, 3 districts there. So
Which
it's
is fine.
different today.
But
Yeah.
do you think in some ways there's an advantage? Because the churches have to not rely on pastors so much to do all the things. If I know that you're a pastor of, 11 different churches and companies, I can't expect you to be at my place all the time. Does it help members actually step up?
I think it helps a lot, and it puts a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the elders. And this is really extremely important because I had, let's say, elders who worked with me and in different churches. And these people, they were like pastors, their maturity, their understanding of the context was much better than I could ever have. So I relied a lot on my elders, and I'm very grateful for the elders that I worked with in both areas, both pastoral districts that I served. So, but it happened because, of course, there are too many churches, and I would be in one church, let's say, once a month. Usually the main church, I would be there probably once a month. Outside that, I would be visiting. Every Sabbath, I would be in a different church.
So how many years, you said you did this district with 11, and then you did another district with 9 and 4 schools, plus 1 if you count this mysterious school that I'm not sure why we don't count it.
Well, no, the reason is
It's either
this.
4 or 5.
No, I had 9 in the second district, and I have 4 schools. These 4 schools, I would go every Wednesday to do chapels on them. So I start in one, next. But there was one that was distant. It's the top of a mountain. So I would go there once every, let's say, 3 months, or sometimes once a month, depending on the situation. I could not go there every week. That's why I'm saying I had
Got it.
4
Now I get it.
would take most of my time on
What part of
chapels.
Brazil is this in?
Everything was in the south.
Okay.
My first pastoral district was in a city called Rio Grande. And my district would extend from Rio Grande up to the border with Uruguay.
Okay.
Yes, up to the border. And the other side, there was a smaller city. I had to cross the water by boat to get there. It's a small city called São Joseph of the North, or São José do Norte. We say it in Portuguese, but we would say São Joseph of the North. So I would go there. I would have 3 congregations there. One was in the city, and the others were in the country. So they were the church members were agriculturers. Some of them were fishermen. So it was a very, let's say, diverse experience with different kinds of cultures that I had in my own territory.
How does this work on a marriage? When you have that big of a distance and you're trying to travel all over and you're kind of a newlywed, how is that for a marriage?
I think this is a challenge. But one thing that facilitated, although it seems that it's too big, I seldom would, let's say, sleep outside my home. I could go and come back. In some cases, I would have to spend a weekend there, and sometimes my wife would go with me. But she was also involved because in the first district, she was very much involved with the local school. So she was there as the principal of the school at some time. In the second district, the same experience. She was very much involved with the school. So she was also part of the ministry. So I think this is very important. She also felt the same responsibility that I felt because she also had her sheep to take care of, So we were together in it.
So after the 9 church, 4.5 school district, where do you go from there?
Well, after 5, I had 2 years in the first pastoral district, 3 years and a half in the second one. And then I got a call to serve as professor of theology in the Northeast Brazil College Theological Seminary, where I graduated a few years earlier.
This is in
It's in Bahia, yes, in
Bahia.
the School of Bahia. So I went there. So I served, if I'm not mistaken, 1 year, 1.5 years as professor. Then they appointed me as the dean of the seminary. So I stayed there for 4 years before I was sent to study and do my doctoral program at Andrews.
So you've never left Brazil?
No, up to the point that I came to Andrews, never. My experience was there. But there's one thing. I was in the south. I was born in the far south. When that gentleman that I mentioned to you offered to pay the school for me, he told me, you can go to São Paulo and study there and I will pay everything for you. And of course, I could have gone to São Paulo. They have an excellent school there. They had and they still have probably the oldest one, the most traditional one. But I said to myself, if I go to São Paulo, it's more like staying in Rio Grande do Sul. It's culturally is not so different. I want to go farther. I want to go to the Northeast because I had that kind of dream and see a different culture.
And you had to meet your wife.
Yeah. I think that was part of the plan, at least in God's mind. So then I went to the Northeast, to the state of Pernambuco. So I had to travel 3 days by bus, three nights and 3 days to get there. It was a long trip. It was a long trip. It was 50-some hours to get there, traveling.
So let's talk about coming to Andrews. What was the biggest culture shock that you had?
Well, the first culture shock is that I thought I knew some English. When they spoke with me for the first time, I said, well, what are you saying? But it took a few days for me to get adjusted to that. But I would say that I wouldn't say it was a shock. Probably I would say I was in admiration for everything that I was seeing there. The school, the library, the culture, the roads, the way people,
The
treat
snow.
each other. The snow, it was that was a shock. And thanks for reminding me that. I think the
And
biggest
that's
shock.
always everybody's shock.
Yeah, no, I think that was the biggest shock. I was not thinking in those terms, but I was thinking more in terms of people. I had an excellent experience, myself and my wife, because she studied there as well, as she pursued a master's in religious education. So we had a wonderful experience there. I'm very grateful for everything that I accomplished at Andrews and for the treatment that I received there from teachers.
What
at the
degree
seminary.
did you get?
I got a PhD in Old Testament
Okay.
with a minor in New Testament.
Okay. So your PhD was in Old Testament. What was your paper on?
You mean my dissertation?
Yes.
It was the Heavenly Sanctuary in the Old Testament.
Which is one reason why we've been able to have our talks. Because I fell in love with the sanctuary. And I know this is about your life story, but we're going to talk about this for a second. How did you pick that topic?
It's a long story, but I can shorten it for you. I was struggling after I finished I was getting to the close of my coursework. I was struggling to find a topic that would be relevant because I wanted to do something for the church. So I had some ideas. Some colleagues have talked to me. They had suggested ideas, but I did not feel prepared to tackle some of the other topics. I wanted something a bit more specific that I felt I could handle it. Then I put my hands on a paper. It was an unpublished paper by Dr. Richard Davidson. It was filed there somewhere in the library or in the Adventist Heritage Center there at Andrews. I found that paper. It was precisely the title, The Heavenly Sanctuary in the Old Testament, where he does the exegesis of some passages. And I look at that, I say, well, but this is a good topic to make this into a dissertation. Then I spoke with him about the topic. And he was very, very happy because he wanted to have the last chapter of his dissertation in the past that he had written on the heavenly sanctuary. But he was not allowed to do so because it was too big. So the advisor, I think for some reason, told him, well, you have to finish now. You cannot do this topic. So in a way, he told me that you completed my dissertation, he told me. So then I went forward and I work on the heavenly sanctuary.
It's okay. He ended up writing like a 600-page book about it, so he still got his say.
Yeah.
Because I read the whole thing.
Yeah, it was a long experience. It was stressful sometimes, which is normal in that kind of process. But and I have serious, let's say, concerns, even related to my health during that experience there, because it's very stressful. I was there with the full sponsorship of my school in Brazil, and I felt the burden to finish and go back. I had to teach and let's say pay back what they had invested in the money that we're paying. Because I must say that the institution that sent me to Andrews, they were very gracious. They paid everything to me. They gave me full scholarship, so I didn't have to worry about anything. I was there to study, and this is what I did. But when you start writing a dissertation, so you feel that you are much smaller than the whole project that is before you. But I need little by little, page by page, every Sunday, every Monday, up to Friday I was there. Every holiday, sometimes the school would close for the new year, for these kinds of things, for graduations. I was there in the library. So it was a time of very, very big sacrifices for me and for my family as well. But we felt the Lord guiding us all the time. By that time, and I have to mention my kids, because otherwise it stays out of the chronology here. I have two boys. The first one was born. We were still in both of them were born in Brazil. The first one was born when I was in my first district, pastoral district, and the other one, the younger one, was born and was in Bahia as a teacher. So when I came to Andrews, the youngest one was 9-10 months old, and the old one was 6 years old. So it was very challenging for them, especially for the older one, to adapt to the language and all those kinds of things. So my wife was also studying for part of the time. So it was a lot of, I would say, sacrifice in a good sense for a good cause. But the Lord helped us. We put our energy, our discipline, our will on that. We felt that we had to finish that program to get back and serve the school. And so it happened. So the Lord was very, very, very good to us.
How did, so after you finished, do you go back to the same university?
Oh, yes. I finished, and then I went back.
And how long were you there?
I spent, I think, 6 years there.
Okay.
When I got the call to serve here at the General Conference.
So during those 6 years that you were there, what were things that you were able to accomplish in that time?
Well,
that you appreciated?
There are some things that I really I had the opportunity to do, because I came back and I spent again 1 year as a professor. 1 year or 1 semester, I don't recall exactly. But then I was appointed dean again of the seminary. So I had the opportunity to train new professors. This is always a concern that I have had, in my experience since I was a church pastor. I think we need to see beyond our own lifespan. We need to see the future. We need a new generation of people who will continue the work that we are doing. So, because we are finite, life is so short. So we need to be always thinking, who will come after me? So I had, on the basis of my experience at Andrews, and this is just, let's say, a snapshot of something. There are other things that I could mention here, but probably do not have time for that. But one of the things that I started to do when I arrived there, as I mentioned to you, I liked Hebrew very much. And then I organized some small groups to study Hebrew with students. I would, in some cases, even offer extra credits for some of those things. So I would gather around me the best students that we had, especially Hebrew students. Another colleague would do something similar with the New Testament. I would do that with the Old Testament people. So we would gather together, we would read, let's say, the book of Ecclesiastes in Hebrew, word by word. Every once a week, sometimes twice a week, we'd gather in the evenings, because it was sometimes outside the normal program. So I would study with them, and I could see the potential for future professors there. These students were really brilliant, and some of those students are now teachers themselves there. They are there teaching, A couple of them, or I think 3, have already finished their doctoral programs, and others on the way. So when I look back to that kind of thing, I think my major accomplishment, what I really am most proud of, was to be able to have that kind of system in place to train teachers for the future, people who can be committed to the scriptures and really serve the church in that capacity.
Because you said we need to be forward thinking, past our lives, whatever. What would you say if you could see if God doesn't come? Okay, that's always the caveat to this. With our belief structure that comes into play. But Christ has not come to bring us back to heaven. Where in 20, 30 years, what would you love to see our seminaries doing more of?
That's a very important question, and probably we would need a full interview just for that.
I can schedule one.
Because we have a tremendous burden, and not just myself, my colleagues at the BRI as well, on the formation of teachers and pastors in our seminary. And the future of the church depends on the kinds of pastors that we form, that we prepare today. So I think there are some areas that we have to be very, very attentive to. There's a lot of work to do on those areas, and I think one of the most important things, I think we want to help these young people when they come to the seminary. They must learn to love the Bible, to study the Bible, to understand what really biblical theology is, what it means to have our system of beliefs founded upon the Bible, based on the Bible. So I think this is something that we need to cultivate even more. I think there's a lot of good work being done in our schools around the world, but we need to emphasize more, because the challenges of the contemporary culture, the challenges of philosophy, of even science, sometimes done from a very secular point of view, is overwhelming. So I would like to see our seminaries to be places where when students come, they have their faith affirmed and not destroyed.
So I'm working my master's in pastoral ministry, and what would you give me as my greatest piece of advice?
Don't allow your academic, intellectual studies, which are extremely valuable and important, to destroy your spiritual life. Cultivate your moments with Jesus, with prayer, because there's always the temptation when we study, we think we know everything, and we tend to neglect the devotional side of life. This is a danger that everyone faces, especially scholars and theologians, because our profession is to read the Bible. That's what we're paid for. That's what we do. But we should not take for granted our relationship with God, because you may read the scriptures, you may do a good exegesis of a biblical passage, but you may not listen to God's voice speaking through that passage. So I think you have to be very careful on that and combine. And I think there is no dichotomy here. I think one thing helps the other. But do not neglect your spiritual devotional life. And on a more academic side, read as much as you can. Read everything that is good, that is available. Because this time when you are pursuing a degree, this is the time to fill all the gaps. Some people say, I will read this, just the minimum that I need. And I will read these things later on. This later on never happens. Just study, read, and I do not forget, I do not regret every page that I read when I was in my doctoral program, everything that I did, I think everything was helpful somehow.
You know, I struggle because a lot of people tell me I need to learn how to skim read better. I can't. Like, I want to get every single thing because if I skim it, I might miss entire paragraphs.
There is no such a thing as dynamic reading. There's no such a thing. You have to read everything.
I have a few people I'm going to tell that to,
This is
and
a
I'm
myth.
going to quote you on that.
No,
Okay.
this is a myth. I try to find these kinds of things because of the volume of work that I have to do. But this does not exist. I consulted with people. I watched, especially in YouTube, some credible people talking about this. So I'm convinced there's no magical formula. Of course, sometimes you are doing a research. You need to quote a book about the subject. You
You
go
just
there.
kind of
That's a different thing. But there's no such a thing as speed reading. You read to understand every word.
That's me.
Yeah.
I realize that if I want to get something out of it, you have to read it. If I just want to fulfill a requirement,
Yeah.
I can skim it. But if I want to really digest it, to really understand it, you have to read
I
it.
read very slowly. I can tell you. I'm not a speed reader. I read everything.
I read fast until it comes to theological books. And I find I'm at about 15 to 20 pages an hour if I'm lucky. And it's like, man, sometimes some of your books from your department, man, I think I'm more like 10 pages an hour. But it's but I get so much out of it. And the gospel opens up and the Bible opens up, and and I think that sometimes we think that, oh, that's what theologians should read, or that's what, those kind of people should read. I believe everyone should cultivate an interest in exploring and deepening their relationship with biblical topics. So that was kind of a little bit of a sidetrack here a little bit, but so you get called to the general conference from being down there?
I was at the Northeast Brazil College. It was used to call at the time the theological seminary. I was working I was teaching. I was also performing as the dean. Acting as the dean of the seminary.
What was it like to be called to serve the BRI?
Well, let me tell you, I was very surprised when I received an email at the time from my friend Angel Rodriguez. He had been the director. He sent me an email explaining to me that he had already obtained the permission of the division president to contact me. So it was nothing, illegal to what he was doing. So, and he told me, well, we need someone here for a vacancy. Would you be willing to consider? Well, I gave him the classical answer that I give any time I would be consulted. I would do what God wants me to do, what the church understands I should do. So I would be open to that. So from then on, later on, he sent me another email asking for my resume, and then it went through. Eventually I arrived here to serve.
What do you see as the greatest theological challenges our church has today?
I think the most serious challenge that we face today and is the challenge to preserve our identity. Because when I say this, this has to do with lifestyle. This has to do with the message, with the distinctive beliefs, and this has to do with our mission. So when you lose one thing, you lose the others. So if you lose the theological side, if you are not strong in your beliefs, in your convictions, this will affect your lifestyle. Consequently, and even your mission. So I think we need to pay close attention to this, because we face tremendous challenges today with all these identitarian, philosophies, ideologies. I think this is a major challenge that the church faces that threatens to divide us, and to take us away from a biblical understanding of sexuality, for example, to be more specific. I think we have to pay very close attention to this and then help the church navigate this moment that we are facing now, and especially our young people, because they're facing the storm that we are not facing. We who are, let's say, at an older generation, we are witness of this struggle. We are trying to help, but the young people, they're facing for them, this is an existential challenge, a spiritual challenge, and we need to help them.
You know, I think we often act like, well, we've been there before. We've been teenagers. We don't,
Yeah.
but we don't know what
But it's
it's
different.
like.
It's
a
different
very
today.
different climate from
It's
when
different,
I
yeah.
was raised, which would be different from when you were
Yeah,
raised. And we need to figure out how to navigate it.
In our times, there was not the issue of identity was more or less settled. People were not questioning their identities. Am I a man? I'm a woman. I'm this or that. This was not an issue as far as I can remember. I didn't have that kind of problems. Today, this is foundational to what is happening. So people are questioning their identities in different levels, and this is a problem. This affects directly what we are as church. So the BRI has produced some materials on the sexuality, and on the area of sexuality, family, and marriage, precisely to address these issues.
And I've read one of those
Yeah,
too. I'm going to have to get through all your books at some point. That's going to be my new goal. Read every BRI book. My last question for you. For members who may be interested in trying to dig deeper, to not just read the Bible at a surface level, but they're not going to go to the seminary, what would you recommend for them?
I think the first recommendation, if you want to understand the Bible well, read the books of the Spirit of Prophecy. I would say the Great Controversy, the Great Conflict series, from Patriarchs and Prophets to the Great Controversy. Anybody who reads those 5 volumes will know much more of the Bible than a lot of people, that even some people who go to seminary. So that's where we start. And the Seventh-day Adventists, as lay persons, as lay leaders, I would recommend to them to read Ellen White. And I do that. I offer that advice on the basis of what I have, let's say, experienced on my father. My father didn't have formal education, but he read and still, to the extent that he can, immerse himself in the Spirit of Prophecy. So he knows a lot about the Bible, because he said, well, Ellen White says this, says that. I'm not saying that Ellen White now will limit our understanding of the Bible, but she opens our mind to understand the Bible. So in that sense that I speak. And also, of course, the church has put some very good resources available to everyone. One of them is the New Andrews Bible Commentary, 1 volume. That is for lay people also, not just for pastors. So this is something that is a bit more academic. It covers the whole Bible. It's a reference work, and it can be very helpful as well. And there are other books. We also have some materials at the BRI at the, let's say, at the more popular level, that are available for free on our website. And our publishing houses also are publishing materials all the time. So it's just a matter of looking at the catalogs and see what is there. So the church has not spared, resources to produce materials to help the church.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking
My
the
pleasure.
time. Thank you especially too for your consistency in keeping the Bible the foundation of our church, to our identity, to our mission, all of that, and how you go and you visit all of these different places and try to help them to be able to understand so they can bring that back to their churches. I appreciate all that you do.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with my special guest, Elias Brasil de Souza. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, YouTube channel, wherever it is you're tuning in from today. I don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with me, and join me next time as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.